Buenas tardes, muchas gracias por haber venido a pesar de que es hora de comida. Vamos a empezar esta sesión del octavo SITAC Puntos, ciegos con una introducción a los paneles y a la ponencia magistral de la maestra Rita Eder por Jenni Sorkin, que es la persona que coordinó este simposio conmigo. Quería hacer dos anuncios antes de empezar esta sesión. Uno de ellos es que las películas que discutimos ayer, una de ellas, Crónica de un verano, será puesta en un programa especial de cine en el espacio Petra, que queda en General Tornel 28, San Miguel, Chapultepec. Mañana habrá un ciclo de cine donde esta película está incluida para aquellos que no la han visto, la película Crónica de un verano de Jean Rouge. Y el segundo anuncio es que la película de Guy Debord, que se mencionó ayer, está disponible en la web en el www.ubu.com, que es un sitio de películas gratis que pueden acceder todos a través de la internet. Les dejo con Jenni Sorkin, quien va a introducir los paneles del día de hoy, y espero que quien quiera hacer una pregunta la formule, por favor, en español. Muchas gracias.
Welcome to day 2 of SITAC. Thank you all for coming. And I would like to express my many thanks to the Patronado de Arte Contemporáneo, and especially Aimé Labert, Maria Bostock, and Clara Rodriguez. So thank you all for being so very helpful to our visit. I'm going to be introducing the panel, and then we will have the keynote speaker, Rita Eder, and then we will have a screening, and then we will have the rest of the panel. Given the increasingly dominant role that women play as administrators, directors, curators, and gallerists within the contemporary art world, it might be difficult to envision with any precision in 2010 the ongoing and persistent malady of sexism and gender iniquity. The question no longer is what is feminism. The more appropriate question is twofold. Who is a feminist, and is she or he on my side? For many years, feminist artists were sidelined, decidedly unpopular both in terms of their content and their biting social critique, using the body and the family as a site of inquiry, exploration, and protest. Feminists were willing to go where other artists dared not tread: sexual violence, abortion, motherhood. We could say then that feminists altered the terms of engagement with regard to formality, injecting narrative content into an era, the early 1970s, that was still in love with the shapely blasé of minimalism. But this is not a story of him versus her, form versus content. That is an old and very boring dialectic, since artists of both genders have proven their simultaneous existence. Still, the comparison persists. Eventually, a younger generation absorbed some of these lessons, deciding that domesticity and the psychology of home were generative and provocative subjects. Rachel White-Reed, Gregor Schneider, Tracy Emin. Where did they learn these lessons? Certainly not from the museums, which have still failed to collect works by now middle-aged women artists. Rather, they learned these lessons at art school, from these same feminist artists. For example, there it is. It's okay. Thank you. For example, Cindy Sherman was preceded in her gender performance by her teacher at Buffalo State University, a Canadian named Susie Lake, who performed semi-narrative tableaus using makeup and wigs, then documented the performance photographically. A now very belated retrospective, curated by Carla Garnett, is currently circulating in Canada, since no American museum wanted it. Is this not working? Oh. Okay, this is not working. Oh, okay, it's fine. Janine Antoni is another example of an artist instructed by a second-wave feminist. During the 1970s, the kitchen became the iconic site of women's universal oppression. Food preparation was a central topic in early feminist art production. But even closer to Antoni's famed performative sculpture, seen here, Gnaw, in which she carved a 600 or 272 kilo block of chocolate and a 272 kilo block of lard with her teeth. Antoni most certainly was influenced by her little-known teacher at the Rhode Island School of Design, Pat Lash, who used cake decorating as a performative trope in her work. But perhaps tenure is really all we can claim as feminism's art world legacy. But adding to these questions of identity lay a profound discursive difficulty. Different national or regional strains of feminism, if we can even classify them as strains, engage very different issues. Given their academic training, most artists attentive to gender are influenced by a group of concerns loosely grounded in Western modernism: realism, credibility and sincerity, spectacle and psychology, to name a few. And for one brief year, 2007, to be a feminist over the age of 55 was briefly sexy, when a proliferation of feminist-themed group exhibitions finally paid homage to a generation of long-ignored practitioners. But then poof, the year of the woman came to an end, and along with it, the magic of seeing socially engaged art everywhere. Because feminism didn't just perform an intensive navel-gazing, but instead pioneered an activist practice. Feminist body-based artists stopped taking their clothes off and pioneered what is known sometimes derisively as public art. Women began engaging with community groups and social groups and environmental activists. Artists, as seen here, Suzanne Lacey and Leslie Leibowitz, who performed rape advocacy and protests at Los Angeles' City Hall in 1977, or Morelli Lauderman-Euclides with her touch sanitation performances where she shook the hands of thousands of New York City sanitation workers and never stopped this important work of awareness, continuing iterations of it into the 1990s. Or Martha Rossler's 1989 installation, If You Lived Here, which provided an ad hoc community center which became a forum for engaging the egregious homelessness along New York City's Bowery. Such a show provided a foundation for an artist like Zoe Leonard to become empowered to document the networks of exploitation and poverty in her Lower East Side neighborhood in the early 2000s, nearly 2 decades after Rossler's work. But now, feminism has undergone a transformation. From a politically charged inquiry, spiked with bitter wit, to a highly synthetic production whose vocabulary has been absorbed, synthesized, digested, and reused to a new conceptual and formal end. Quite simply, the market has taken over. Any woman artist these days is assumed to be working through a feminist vocabulary. I'd like to point to the recent Pipilotti Wrist installation at MoMA, organized by Klaus Biesenbach. The show achieved an extraordinary amount of popular and critical success, becoming a standalone draw for a great number of visitors. Feminist engagement in this context was interpreted as a transformation of the space of the museum from a container of objects into an active zone of production that is less performative than entertainment-driven. Seen here, Pour Your Body Out takes as its centerpiece a circle, at once communal and entirely recycled, a form with direct links to the solidarity and circularity of the 70s version of feminist theory, the consciousness raising group. Consciousness raising, also known more colloquially as CR, was a central ideology within second wave feminism, employing lived experience as a barometer of widespread injustice towards women. Often described as embodying the personal is political credo, which is what the title of this panel seeks to reverse, CR was a group-directed exploration, leaderless, in the verbalization of individual experience, using an equal power structure to foster a unique and immediate intimacy in order to emphasize the ways in which the private dimensions of women's lives could be used as a tool of social control and repression. However, the problem with Pour Your Body Out is that it pretends to invoke such a community. The exhibition was praised for feminizing the space of the Museum of Modern Art. However, Rist invokes the community of passivity, of lounging, hanging out, texting within the atrium of the museum. Why is her exhibition praised as feminist, though? Plain and simple. The tropes for feminism are all in place, as seen here. A video projection of fleshy bodies and nature scenes, a glowing pink womb room with a circle set in the middle, providing a platform for a discourse of equality. And I'd like to just show you an old piece by Faith Wilding. It's a crocheted environment actually titled Womb Room, as a more subtle precedent of Rist. The New York critic Jerry Saltz wrote glowingly, and foolishly, I might add, of Rist's installation, quote, "The atrium of this bastion of masculinism becomes a womb, and the museum itself a woman. In an abstract way, Rist makes the institution ovulate." But Rist's work is an imposter. It looks feminist in that slick ad campaign sort of way, as though we are being sold pink razors or bubble bath. It even feels feminist in its false sense of safe space, a place to gather and express oneself fully. But this is a trap, and it's not even Rist's fault. Her piece fails because she doesn't know the history of what came before she began making this work. Because as an artist, 1970s feminism is still not a part of the canon. Her response to history is passive and completely incapable of activism in the way that women artists of the 1970s took to the streets, the airwaves, the steps of City Hall, and fought for the kind of attention that still embarrasses many people today, because that is not how women should behave. Two New York artists, Cheryl Donegan and Kim Rosenfeld, were also bothered by the passivity of Rist's space, and their solution was to hold an impromptu yoga class. Seen here, called MoMA Yoga. As Saltz gleefully described it, quote, "It took audience participation to a new level, doing nothing, absolutely together. There was a mellowness that overtook the space," end quote. Thus, the installation is fully transformed into an oasis of complacency. Yet, on the other hand, Rist, like many women artists of her generation, is what we could call a context provider. In this piece, she has created a temporary community by building a quasi-democratized feminine space. But feminine is not the same as feminist. Feminism is still viewed as a cultural other, a variant that does not naturally belong or fit comfortably within the realm of the museum. In this field of reference, an entire category of people, that is, politicized and activist women artists, are not necessarily welcomed within the space of the museum unless it is they who are performing cultural labor, which, as I pointed out earlier, is the primary laboring class within the art world. Rist's work is just one instance of a much larger trend in what is often misperceived as a socially engaged art practice. Many other artists, men and women, work in an even more anthropological vein, embedding themselves in communities where they proceed to collect stories, solicit opinions on politics and social justice, and sometimes even engage in conflict resolution. Hal Foster charted this phenomenon in his 1996 essay, Artist as Ethnographer, in which he observed the ethnographic mapping of a given institution, quote, of a related community is a primary art form that site-specific art now assumes. It is important to remember, then, that these pseudo-ethnographic critiques are very often commissioned and indeed franchised, end quote. So in closing, I will ask of our panelists, what are the parameters for a socially engaged art practice? Do artists overstep their boundaries as producers when they perform the role of the anthropologist, archivist, or auteur? Is this a radical exploration or an amateurization of an outside field? If the goal of a feminist-influenced praxis is to facilitate self-empowerment across social, cultural, and economic boundaries, what is the role of self-representation, and how carefully must it be conceived? It is my pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Rita Eder, Mexico's eminent art historian. Eder is a full researcher at the Instituto de Investigaciones Estéticas, UNAM, director of the institute from 1990 to 1998, and teaches at the Graduate Department in Art History on the Faculty of Philosophy and Letters. She was the coordinator of the Graduate Department from 2005 to 2007, and has written more than 100 articles on modern and contemporary art in Mexico and Latin America, and published 7 books. Most recent publications include Las Artes Visuales in America Latina, 1900 to 2009, and Tiempo de Fractura, to be published in 2010 by Larousse Encyclopedia in Paris. In 2000, she was a visiting professor in the art department at the University of Buenos Aires, and in 2004, the Department of Art History, Visual Arts, and Theory at the University of British Columbia, and most recently, in 2008, in the History Department, École des Hautes Études in Paris. Thank you very much, and it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Eder.